Hello and welcome to Gin with Gwynne. I'm Oliver Gwynne. This is where I give my off-the-cuff and unrehearsed thoughts on marketing, data and philosophy. This week I'm talking about Confucius and how he does and does not apply to modern business context. Now, who is Confucius? You might be a little bit confused, and that's where that word comes from. Confucius was a Chinese philosopher, teacher, and political advisor during the late Zhao dynasty, and he lived in a time of great turmoil, and he believed that basically society could be improved through moral behavior, education, and ethical leadership rather than just through force or harsh laws. And he developed a system centered around the virtues of benevolence, righteousness, proper conduct and respect, and trustworthiness. And he taught that individuals should cultivate good character, and that would lead to stronger families, better governments, and a more harmonious society. And he has been massively influential. There's Confucius temples and schools all around the world even today. So how could Confucius apply to business today? He seems like a good guy, and I'm sure we all want to be ethical leaders, right? So one of his core principles that we should lead by example. He said, "The virtue of the gentleman is like the wind. The virtue of a small man is like the grass. The wind blows, the grass bends." Confucius believed that leaders influence others through their character rather than through power alone. And when we apply this to business, it's all about leaders should model integrity, accountability, and professionalism. Employees are more likely to trust leaders who practice what they preach, get their hands dirty, and actually do the hard work. And ethical leadership can improve organizational culture and, of course, employee engagement. But there are some limitations to this. So modern businesses sometimes require leaders to make unpopular decisions such as redundancies and restructuring, where moral example alone may not maintain trust. Leadership today also depends on technical expertise and strategic decision-making, not only personal virtues. But of course, you could imagine at the time that Confucius was writing about leadership, the carrot or the whip would have been a great debate on how to motivate people. And in most cases, the whip probably would have been the choice that a lot of people would have made. And so he was saying something relatively radical and different at the time. But when we think of it today, of course, we all want to be ethical leaders and lead by example, but it's not always so easy to do because we're not involved in the day-to-day that many of the people below us would be. Number two, build strong relationship. Do not impose on others what you yourself do not desire. So this reflects empathy and mutual respect in all relationships. And of course, in business, we want to build long-term relationships with customers, suppliers, and employees, treat stakeholders fairly and respectfully, develop trust instead of focusing solely on short-term profits, right? Well, modern business is highly competitive, and organizations sometimes prioritize efficiency or shareholder returns over relationships. Strong personal relationships can also create favoritism or conflicts of interest, which is not always the best thing if not managed carefully. For me, I saw a big shift in the way that businesses think from the pandemic in terms of long-term plans were completely thrown out the window. Everybody sort of accepted that everything was going to change all the time. There's always going to be some disruption. So why bother making a 5-year plan? Let's just make a 6-month plan or a 1-year plan or any of this kind of things. And so I think building strong relationships is something that is inherently linked to longer term plans, because if you think longer term, you think about how you would treat people and you would minimize any disruptions. But too often we send people an email, even if they've not really opted into that. Think, what's one more email? Or, legitimate interest, it's fine, I'm sure it'll be okay. And then, we lose that person forever. Too often I see that companies chase those short-term profits and they don't think longer term about how it will impact the business. This could be through things like discounting or limited time offers that are just there to get more people through the door, but ultimately might bring in lower LTV people and hurt the business in the long term. It could also mean just like putting the price up randomly or deciding that they want to make more money off people today who have been loyal to them for a long time and not really thinking about, well, yeah, we've got some new customers, but what about the customers that got us this far? Number three, act with integrity. The gentleman understands what is right. The petty person understands what is profitable. Confucius believed that ethical behavior should come before personal gain. And that doesn't sound very true of today's society, does it? In business, we would love to think that ethical decisions, even when they reduce short-term profits, are the ones that we'd want to make. We'd love to think that everybody is going to be transparent with customers and they protect the company's reputation through honesty. But that's really not the case, in my opinion. I think it's been a long time since anybody particularly cared. I think a lot of companies have learned that they can have a wide-scale bad PR event. In most cases, it's not going to end their company. People will still use them, especially the larger size companies. We all know that Amazon is not a great company and purposely was undercutting and stealing the IP of smaller businesses, replicating their products, selling them at a loss, gaining market share, and then basically putting them out of business, which is predatory and illegal. But they were doing that. And everybody was like, oh, well, making a loss and then getting market share, that's a model that seems to work. Well, let's copy them. And so Temu today is probably doing the same thing. Transparency with customers, I don't think that we really see that. I mean, Temu has been found guilty twice of literally stealing people's data from their phones, and yet the application, maybe it still does the same thing today, I don't know. They did it a third time and they have a ridiculous onboarding offer, which is like, oh, you get £40 for free or something. And so you have to think to yourself, well, if they're desperate to get me on this platform, what are they selling? Well, I must be the product, basically. Public companies often face pressure to maximize shareholder value, and that can often make ethical choices difficult when they conflict with financial performance. Ethical standards may also vary across cultures and industries and time and all that kind of stuff. So, morality is a whole different ball game. It's not always easy to know how you can act with integrity. And so I think this is something that businesses in general are doing less and less. They don't necessarily treat employees with integrity. They don't necessarily treat their customers with that. And so I think it's something that we should be paying more attention to. And I think overall, life is a long game and people will remember the way that you treat them. And it might be 5-10 years down the line, but suddenly that person who you mistreat might be the person who you now really want to sell to, and now they're not going to do that. I remember one time I was helping somebody out with a product, did it for a very low amount, let's say, asked them, delivered what they want, and they decided just not to pay me. And then years later, I was their perfect prospect, and I had like 5 or 6 different companies who would have bought what they were selling. And of course I was like, well, I do remember what you did, and so the very small amount of money that they had fleeced me of probably cost them tens of hundreds of thousands of pounds. And so, life is a long game and people do remember how you treat them. And you might think, oh, well, there's always more customers and I'm only trying to stay profitable so I can do good things as well. If I'm not profitable, I can't pay my staff well and I can't give back to society and all this kind of stuff. But yeah, life is a long game. So act with integrity. Number 4, invest in learning. It is not a pleasure having learned something to practice it at due intervals. I've got that quite wrong. Is it not a pleasure having learned something to practice it at due intervals? So Confucius viewed learning as a lifelong responsibility. And learning internally, I think, unless you're in a very large organization with very structured learning outcomes, it's very difficult, let's be honest, to fit development in. I know it's on a lot of like employee roadmaps and all of this kind of stuff, but it's difficult. There's not always time for that. You're busy with your day to day. You can't always be like, okay, I'm going to spend an hour and let's develop this and all that kind of stuff. So obviously you want to encourage continuous professional development, and bear in mind that professional development might not be in the lines of what somebody is doing today, but where they want to go. And that might be a little bit of a distraction from their job, but it can still be a good thing. Invest obviously in employee training in whatever shape or form that takes. It could be online courses, it could be in person, all this kind of stuff. I guess the real investment is often time and a little bit of distraction. And learn from failures rather than blaming individuals. Everything is a learning opportunity. You don't fail, you just learn. And the limitations are, of course, that training requires significant investment in time and money. Rapid technological changes means that knowledge can become outdated pretty quickly, requiring continuous reinvestment. And you also have to make sure that if you are going to invest in employees, that they're going to sort of repay you back, not necessarily in the new skill, but in loyalty and all that kind of stuff, and that they'll actually use what you taught them, which is not always the case. Number 5, put people first. Benevolence consists in loving others. Benevolence was central to sort of Confucian ethics. So support employee well-being, create fair and respectful workplaces, improve motivation and retention through genuine care. Limitations, of course, is that businesses must balance employee welfare with profitability. I think there's always a percentage of people who just, for want of a better term, will take the piss a little bit, and they'll take advantage of your kindness, and they'll take advantage of the system. And that's unfortunately always the case in every single organization. If you are overly accommodating, it may actually reduce accountability or make performance decisions harder because you are being too nice. But I think the pandemic, did it not teach us that actually people can work from home, you can be flexible with people, the work will still get done? And so small things can make a big difference in terms of allowing your employees to work where they want while you're in the office for 5 days. Honestly, if they need to go and pick up their kid and the kid's sick, just let them do it, and they'll repay you back in loyalty. And of course, the work will probably still get done. Number 6, focus on long-term success. And this is what I was talking about earlier. The cautious seldom err. Confucius valued careful judgment and stability over impulsive actions. So build sustainable businesses, and sustainable businesses, typically they are, in my opinion, or in my experience, process-led. You get to a process where something works and you keep doing it basically until it doesn't work, and then you find a new way of doing that thing, or you find something new to do. Too often what happens is people try things for a really short amount of time and they don't invest properly in them. Always work iteratively, work based on what works. If you're thinking about doing a new service, well, creating a web page probably doesn't take that long time. Cool. Do a few LinkedIn posts. If there's no traction from that, okay, maybe you then don't want to spend money on advertising, or you don't want to spend money on the sales team going out to them. And so build in a proper way. So invest in your reputation rather than chasing short-term profits. I guess this is on a similar theme to what I was talking about earlier. And it comes back to long-term thinking about, in 5 years' time, what do I want to look like? What do I want to be known for in the industry? Because reputation does genuinely build without you realizing it. And you can build a portfolio and a customer base. And if you treat them fairly and with fairness, I think most people will remember that even if things go wrong. Limitations there are that some industries, particularly technology, require rapid innovation and risk-taking, and so you can't always take a long-term view. You might have to just figure something out and develop an MVP, but as I said, it's all about working iteratively. Excessive caution may cause businesses to miss new opportunities or lose market share. I'm sure there's a million examples of that. Kodak is one that comes to mind, where they didn't think that digital cameras were the future, even though they developed one. And last but not least, encourage harmony. The gentleman seeks harmony, not uniformity. So Confucius distinguished between harmony from simple agreement. Encourage respectful discussion while working towards shared goals. Faster teamwork across departments. Resolve conflicts constructively. The limitations here is Confucian respect for hierarchy can discourage employees from challenging managers. So he was a big believer in hierarchy. And it's not always easy to encourage that your employees will challenge you, because sometimes you have spent a lot of time designing something and you should always be able to justify what you have designed or the process that's in place. And if you can't, that's a problem. But you have somebody new in and you're like, oh my God, I'm gonna have to explain this whole thing again. It can be very annoying. So innovation often depends on questioning established ideas, which may conflict with this sort of maintaining harmony. But I think the uniformity point is just that you can have different ideas, you can have different ways of doing things, you can have different working styles, and the overall harmony of a business relies on different points of view to find the best way of working and to find a way of winning, as opposed to uniformity, which is really about everybody establishing that process, because all processes break eventually, or they become outdated. So Confucius' philosophy remains highly relevant because it promotes ethical leadership, trust, continuous learning, and long-term thinking, all qualities associated with successful organizations who are around for decades and not years. But modern businesses operate in a very fast-moving global markets where innovation, competition, and shareholder expectations can sometimes conflict with Confucian ideals. Rather than applying his teachings literally, many organizations can benefit by adapting his principles to balance ethical leadership with flexibility, creativity, and commercial realities. And so I think it's a really interesting thing to do, because I think we'd all like to strive to be the best version of ourselves and our organizations and to act in a morally right way. And I do genuinely believe that if you do that, people will remember, and every good thing that you do is like a drop in the ocean. It creates a ripple effect that more and more people will be affected in a good way, and then later on they will affect other people, and so on and so forth. But it's always a balancing act between doing the right thing, not at the cost, not at the profitability, and not at the expense where it can actually cost you sort of your own personal time and effort and all that kind of stuff, because not everybody is grateful for your sort of generosity, and of course some people take advantage of it. So these have been my thoughts on how Confucius philosophy applies to business today, or in some ways how it doesn't. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and thanks for watching another Gin with Gwynne.